Wait a minute. Life is certain? Wasn't Descartes known for questioning everything?
He rejected traditional doctrines, which were often speculative in order to arrive at certain knowledge. Reason, not tradition, was his guiding principle.
We ought never to allow ourselves to be persuaded of the truth of anything unless on the evidence of our reason.
He doubted everything and wanted to establish fundamental certainties. He derived a theory from these certainties.
Did he then have no more doubts?
Every doubt made him more certain. Descartes didn't believe in the philosophical teachings of his time. Instead, he developed his own philosophy. His philosophy is based only on what he is sure about.
But didn't he have to study philosophy first?
Descartes was largely self-taught. His mother died just 1 year after his birth. His father, who was a member of the Parliament of Rennes in Brittany, was frequently absent. He was raised by his maternal grandparents. Intellectually, however, he always remained independent. Initially, he was taught to read, write, and do arithmetic by a private teacher. At the age of 11, he enrolled at a Jesuit school in La Flèche. However, he was unable to keep up with the lessons. Instead, he spent every morning in bed teaching himself. He also practiced meditation. He continued this daily routine later in life. Every morning, he would meditate and write in bed.
I found myself beset by so many doubts and errors that I came to think I had gained nothing from my attempts to become educated, but increasing recognition of my ignorance.
At the age of 20, he obtained his high school diploma and passed the required law exam in Poitiers. But he never practiced as a lawyer.
But how did he make a living?
For 2 years, he lived in poverty in Paris, devoting himself entirely to his studies. He had little contact with others.
Didn't he study at the Sorbonne?
No, he then became a soldier. We don't know why. Although he considered himself as a Catholic, he joined the army of Maurice of Orange, who was Protestant and an enemy of the Catholics. He received military training. In true Descartes fashion, he wrote a treatise on fencing. Rather than basing it on previous treatises on fencing, he presented his own personal convictions.
This treatise is not widely known.
No wonder, it has not been preserved. Descartes did not stay with the Protestants for long, switching sides after a year to join Maximilian of Bavaria in the 30 Years' War. But there is no evidence that Descartes took part in any fighting. He traveled around with the army and always found time to continue his studies. He was time and again on the move. Descartes was a restless man who traveled his entire life. He often changed his address without telling anyone. Even today, we still don't know exactly his whereabouts, or at least only approximately.
Perhaps he just wanted to be left in peace.
Certainly, he focused on his work his entire life.
But how did he become a philosopher?
According to his own account, he had 3 dreams while stationed as a soldier in Neuburg, Bavaria. He dreamed that he would completely rebuild the sciences, mathematics, physics, and philosophy.
For I shall unquestionably reach the truth, if only I give sufficient attention to all the things which I perfectly understand, and separate these from all the other cases where my apprehension is more confused and obscure. And this is just what I shall take good care to do from now on.
He is well known as a mathematician.
He could be described as the father of modern mathematics. Medieval mathematics became modern with him. Of course, other mathematicians of his time also brought mathematics out of the Middle Ages. He adopted the vowel consonant notation and the use of X and Y as mathematical symbols from the mathematician and secret agent François Viète. Above all, he, through the introduction of the coordinate system, and Fermat were the founders of the analytical geometry. He said he came up with the idea for the coordinate system while lying in bed and observing cracks in the ceiling. The coordinate system made it possible to convert geometry into arithmetic.
Being a soldier, mathematician, and philosopher is not an ideal combination.
He did not remain a soldier for long. In 1622, he inherited a small fortune from his father. From then on, he was financially independent and could devote himself entirely to his studies. He never sought a position at a university. especially since at the time universities were heavily influenced by scholasticism and focused on repeating existing knowledge. In other words, the opposite of what Descartes did.
Did he stay alone after that?
No, he stayed in Paris for several years and was in contact with other intellectuals. However, philosophy in Paris was very conservative at that time, so he soon moved to Amsterdam and other places in Holland where there were greater tolerance. He was a Catholic who needed the tolerance of the Protestants. He stayed in the Netherlands for 20 years. Descartes was interested in everything. He was a polymath. He often dissected bodies. He wanted to publish a book about heliocentrism titled The World. It explains that the Sun is at the center of the planetary system. However, after learning of Galileo's condemnation, he abandoned the project. The book was only published after his death.
And what about philosophy?
In 1637 he published one of his most important works, the Discourse on Method. Out of caution, he published it anonymously.
What was so dangerous about it?
It cannot be compared to any other philosophical work published up to that point. Descartes developed a completely new approach to arriving at insight and knowledge. His method is based on breaking things down into parts for analysis. He constructed a model in which one moves from the simplest to the most complicated.
I thought that I ought to reject as absolutely false all opinions in regard to which I could suppose the least ground of doubt, in order to ascertain whether after that there remained anything in my belief that was wholly indubitable.
And so he said, "I think, therefore I am."
That is his most famous quote. His new method starts with skepticism. In order to arrive at a secure foundation, he doubted everything, but realized that he could not doubt his own doubting.
But immediately I noticed that while I was trying thus to think everything false, it was necessary that I, who was thinking this, was something. And observing that this truth, I am thinking, therefore I exist, was so firm and sure that all the most extravagant suppositions of the skeptics were incapable of shaking it, I decided that I could accept it without scruple as the first principle of the philosophy I was seeking.
Therefore, there must be someone who doubts. That is how he proved his own existence.
What about the existence of others?
For that he needed God. The outside world, the reality, is given by God. In this respect, he did not establish dualism, but rather trialism. According to him, there is the thinking self, the material outside world, such as the body, and then God, who created everything.
So he got on well with the church.
He wanted to get along with the Catholic Church, but he had a hard time doing so because he wasn't willing to compromise. His ideas were simply too new. That's why he often presented them only as hypotheses, even though he was convinced that they were correct. Ultimately, that didn't help him, because the Vatican placed his book on the index and banned them.
But he was safe from the Catholics in Holland.
Well, he actually didn't get along with the Dutch Protestants. After the publication of the Discourse, he had a dispute with Dutch theologians in Utrecht. They rejected his new ideas, especially since he urged his readers to forget everything they had been taught up to that point. They were offended. Descartes despised them and made no secret of it. With this polemic, Descartes also tried to win over the Jesuits in France, but it didn't work.
He probably didn't have many friends.
However, Descartes had a good relationship with women, whom he felt understood him. Elizabeth of the Palatinate was important to him. He corresponded with her and later met her in person. He dedicated one of his major works, Principles of Philosophy, to her. He said that she was the only person who truly understood him. Descartes believed that women were intellectually equal to men. His logical system of thought left no room for discrimination.
Unfortunately, women were not permitted to participate in intellectual life at that time.
That's true. However, some noble women took the freedom to do so. In addition to Elizabeth of the Palatinate, there was Queen Christina of Sweden. Christina, who was 22 years old at the time, invited Descartes to Stockholm to become her tutor. Initially, Descartes had no desire to move to cold Sweden, but he ultimately accepted the invitation to the royal court.
That was probably the peak of his career.
It was actually a mistake. He really couldn't stand the cold Swedish climate, especially since he arrived in November. In addition, he and Christina had opposite daily routines. While he got up late, she was awake early in the morning. 3 times a week he had to show up at her library at 5 a.m. to teach her. His mind certainly resisted, but his body couldn't keep up. After only 2 months, he contracted pneumonia and died.
Did he influence Christina?
Some claimed that they had a romantic relationship. However, there's no evidence to support this. It's just a macho attitude to deny a woman the ability to have a purely intellectual interest. In fact, Descartes' 2 months in Stockholm had a lasting influence on Christina. She certainly had a good understanding of his theory of free will. She converted to Catholicism.
And that in a Protestant country.
She had to abdicate as queen. There was also a rumor that Descartes had been poisoned. This rumor persisted for a long time and inspired books until just a few years ago. But in 2020, scientists proved that there were no traces of poison in his bones.
With his radical theories, he certainly inspired many subsequent thinkers. You could say that he still exists today because his work is still read. I read, therefore he is.
In his terminology, he is often stuck in the Middle Ages. He talks about spirit and soul. In our time, he would rather speak of consciousness.
What would you recommend reading?
The best introduction to Descartes' philosophy is his book Meditation. It is written like an experience report. He describes the adventure of his own thinking. Descartes' thinking is interesting enough that reading him can become an adventure.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.